Tuesday. I don't know if you guys saw the crazy sync that I'm working on. Busting out these TikTok syncs. Can you hear me okay? I hope everybody can, because if not, I'm just kind of rambling on my own. But I do what I can. I do what I can. All right, awesome. I know last time you couldn't hear me, Cindy. Oh no. What the hell? This light's gonna be annoying. All right, I'm gonna turn it off. 1 second, guys. Your data sucks. Henry, where are you that your data sucks? How terribly situated are you, buddy? Okay, so I'm going to go. 1 second here. Discord chat. That's my window. Nested me. My camera is not working. I know, my backup camera isn't working. I don't know why. Okay, there we go. Man. Which one is it? There we go. Beautiful. All right. Well, I can, let's see. I don't know who Scylla is. I'm going to invite you to speak. Cindy, you can hop on here too if you want. Okay, so I was going to go over some Reno stuff, mostly phases of work. Hello, how are you? Welcome. I can't hear you. Your mic is muted. So on the bottom of your screen, you gotta unmute the mic. There. Now you should be able to speak.
Hello. Can you hear me? Hi, can you hear me? Can you guys hear me?
Maybe log off and log back on, Scylla. I'm gonna disconnect you and then just reconnect. Sometimes that
Okay.
works for some reason. Henry, you here?
Or is that better? Can you hear me? Hello?
Oh, maybe it's me.
Hello?
Speakers. I can't hear anybody.
Oh, okay. I guess
I was
I guess
hearing
Cindy
you
can hear me.
earlier. Voice, video, audio.
Reset your
There
settings.
we go. I hear you. I hear you, bro. I hear you. I got you.
There we go. All
Okay.
right, perfect, perfect.
Yeah, so I was gonna talk mostly about the Reno stuff that I'm kind of working on, the Reno program. Scylla, are you there?
Can
Scylla?
you guys hear me now?
Yes, we can. How are you?
Good, good. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. Haven't seen you on Discord before, or have I?
Yes, it's my first time.
Oh, nice. Nice. What brings you
Yes.
to grow?
Um, well, I connected with Manny over Instagram, and then he introduced me to this new, I would call it community, realtors and all the information and great events that would go on. So I just thought, I'm a new agent, so still in the process of getting my license from Rico. So I just thought it'd be nice to just kind of join these conversations and learn from it.
Oh, awesome. Well, welcome. I mean, if you have any questions from us, we're always here to help. We're a pretty easygoing community. I'll bring Cindy up here too. Yeah, like we're trying to go live. I mean, we're going live 5 times a week, right, as a community, and everybody's a different I guess, expert in their own topics. So, for example, Manny's obviously an agent. He does a lot of, talking about sales. He does a lot of social media and marketing. He does a really good job of that. Myself, I'm a reno guy. I have a renovation company, a kitchen manufacturing business. I do a bunch of that stuff. Henry's a BCIN designer, so he helps with all the drawings, paperwork, submitting for permits, even looking at zoning and stuff like that. Like if you have clients that want to look to legalize a duplex or turn a duplex into a sixplex, he's the kind of guy to find out whether you could actually do it or not, from that sort of sense. And Cindy's our super investor. He's
I'm here to learn.
we're all here to learn. We're all here to learn, and that's the cool thing about learning from each other is that learning is
Yes.
everyone can learn, and there's not, one person. I'm not better than anybody else or anything like that. I think there's
Stop being so modest, Taco. Well,
Oh wait, can't. Guess we can't hear him, right?
Oh,
No,
there we
can't
go.
hear
There we
Taco.
go. There we go. Hello.
Yeah.
Can you hear
There
me?
we go. Yep.
Okay. Sorry. I
Yep.
actually
Yep. I can hear.
I touched my mic. I'm sorry. Okay, I have a Reno program that I'm building out. Reno. I wonder what it is. I'm just gonna open it up and we can go through it. I'm gonna share secrets that I am working on. And I guess you guys can kind of go over some of the stuff you want me to touch on and help each other with. Work scope. So what I've been doing is I've basically been taking all of the different checklists and items that I have from my renovation company and slowly start putting them together into a, I guess, program or outlet or a workshop. I have no idea exactly how it's going to go down, but I'm going to do my best to share the most that I can share with all of my experience. So just give me a second here. Just got to find this. Talk about investing form.
Taco, that's what I call you. Is that correct?
That's what everybody calls me.
It's just that it's my favorite food, so it's kind of funny to keep referring you to taco. But just a question for you: when you say renovations, you basically do renovations for home and in real estate. Is that correct?
Yes. I'm mostly real estate investor focused, but
Yes,
we do stuff for all sorts of different clients.
I understand. Okay.
But we specialize in doing like duplex, triplex conversions,
Yes,
and that sort of things. Okay,
I
so
understand.
I'm just gonna go off of this Word document that I have. I guess I can share my screen with you guys. Let me just share my screen. This is a Word document. It's not going to be sexy. We're going to make it sexier at some point, I assume. But for now, this is what we're going to be using to baseline a lot of the course stuff. Okay, can everybody see this Word document? Which one are we using? All right, which document I'm using? Course layout, right? And 1 second, I just gotta switch my Discord. Oh, screen. There you go. Everybody capturing that?
Yes.
All right, I just gotta do one thing on my Actually, don't worry about it. I won't even worry about it. Okay. So this is what I'm thinking of how I'm going to structure some of the stuff on my course for the renovation side of things. And this is obviously some of the stuff that I'm good at and I know. Um, so when we're talking about like reno programs or renovations in general, the big things that I find are these seven here that are listed. So it's all comes down to design and I would say design and scope, right? That's really what's going to help you determine what type of renovation you need to do and then what pieces are going to be involved based on what it is you go over. For this is specifically for doing multiple units or adding value to your property. So this is going to be rental property focused for this talk. If you guys got any questions at any time, just interrupt me because I'm just winging this thing um, and just really getting your feedback on what your thoughts are on some of this stuff. So a big thing that we go over is layouts. So some of the stuff that when I walk into buildings, like I know Cindy, you were at that property tour where we went into a couple of those houses. Like we've done so many different buildings and houses. Even that project that I'm working on in Guelph with Henry, we walked into the building, we looked at each other, and we were like, "Oh, this is this building." We already we already did the building, right? So understanding layouts is really important, and trying to stick to a layout that you've done in the past that works makes it really easy for you to continue to do turnovers. Because if you've baked a cookie once, you're going to be able to bake that cookie better every single time versus like, okay, doing chocolate chip and then trying to make some like, lemon flavored cookie and then going and like trying to make something like, I don't know, something completely different, right? And then start going into pies and stuff like that. Like the more and more you don't stick to your recipe, the more complicated it gets. Um, so big things that we think out when we come to layouts are access, right, for the property. If you plan on splitting it into 2 units or 3 units, what sort of access are you going to like? How are you going to create the entrances and exits for these properties, right? Like, how are they getting in and out of the house? Because they need to get in and out of the house. The other things I look at too is even when I'm walking up to the property, I'm going to look at how is my tenant going to park or how are my tenants going to park. If I have 2 tenants, 3 tenants, 4 tenants, 10 tenants, I'm trying to factor in where is the space for that, right? The less, like, if you look around, you're like, man, this is a crazy parking lot. I don't even know how many people can fit. Like, it's good for parking. But if you're, trying to make a fiveplex and you only got one spot, it's a teeny tiny driveway. Well, it's going to be it's going to create problems down the road or cause you to go over bigger hurdles. Like you're going to have to go um, get some exceptions from the city to allow you to use street parking as a consideration, or because it's close to downtown core, you might have to do a traffic study. There's more hurdles that you got to jump, right? So if you're new to investing and you're like just getting into it or helping newer people, you want to try to get slam dunk kind of layouts, right? Stuff that's super simple. So, side splits, back splits, bungalows that have a side entrance already pre-built in. Okay, well, you walk into the property, you can get in from the side door and in from the front door. Well, that's 2 entrances. It's probably going to be a lot easier to do that and a lot less costly because you don't have to cut in a new entrance or dig in like a basement walkout, right? Um, and that's for layout. Laundry, I think, I don't know. I find like laundry, we were doing a lot more laundry before COVID, where it was really crucial to generate the maximum rent and you were kind of competing against a lot of inventory. I feel like today the environment is different and the inventory is a lot lower. Like I find finding a tenant is probably a lot easier than it was in the past. I don't know what your guys' thoughts or takes on this is, but I think getting tenants today is easier than it was before. And there was a lot more competition before because there was more of a surplus, but you know, COVID shutting housings down, like buildings down, interest rates going up, builders stopping, and all of these people retiring have really compounded the housing crisis that we had. Now it's even worse, I think. So laundry, laundry, if you can add it, it's always a great to add, but I find like it's not necessarily mandatory until you start getting into 3+ units. When do we need to have a common laundry space, Henry?
So basically, you're going to need laundry no matter what kind of conversions you do. If you're legalizing it, yeah, you're going to need laundry.
In a duplex?
Either it's got to be common or it's got, yeah, if you're legalizing the unit, you need laundry regardless, as per today's building code. You can have it common laundry or you can have it within each unit.
Okay.
So it doesn't matter how many units you're doing. It can be 2 to 100. They just need laundry service one way or another.
Interesting. Well, there's a lot of little attics we've done that didn't get laundry service. Okay, and then the next big thing that I look at is the electrical panel. So the size of the panel is really going to determine the amount of units you can add. And if you're, obviously if the power you have isn't enough, well, you need to go get more. And in typical residential projects, like 400 is going to be your max. Like 200 is probably going to be your max. So these are other little things that you got to kind of consider when you're adding, multiple units, especially now that we're really going into that 3 to 4 unit number for power. And one thing I'm missing, which I'm going to add in here, is definitely the exact same thing, but it's going to be size of your water line. So these are like either photos you should be taking, right? Like of your property. Water line. Of the power, right? So you should be able to show your contractor, hey man, I'm looking at this property. I think it's good, but here's a picture of the panel, right? Like try to take a picture of the actual breakers, especially the main breaker, because that's going to typically say how many amps it has, as well as at the meter base, it'll also tell you. One thing I've used as like a little reference tool is if you can see how many wires are coming in, like in older cities where the wires are still overhanging, every wire is typically 100 amps. So if they have 1, 2, 3, then you probably have 300 amps worth of power. But each unit will require about 60 amps of service in order to get it functioning, and then 100 amps if you're going to go into like heat pumps and a lot of electrical sources of power for your property. And then your water line, same thing. You could like Google, what is it called? Water service table. Do you know, Henry? I don't know off the top of my head what it's called.
Yeah, the plumbing data sheet.
Yeah, the plumbing data sheet. You can Google plumbing data sheet. Like in this, we'll add links to it, but like City of Toronto has one. They all have one, and you can enter in how many toilets you're gonna plan on having, how many washer dryers, how many sinks, how many vanities, all of the items, and then it's gonna tell you the size of the water line you should have for that city. Most of them are gonna all be on par. So if you use the City of Toronto's data sheet, it's pretty consistent, I would say, across Ontario, anyways, that I've seen so far. I don't know if you've ran into something like where it's been way different, but I find that those water tables are the exact same across the board.
Yeah, they're pretty much relatively the same thing. I just dealt with one in Oshawa. It's a little bit different, but overall the principle is all there, right? So it's same sort of information. It's just a size that we have to kind of account for. Like typically for my duplexes, we're always increasing it from whatever it is to like at least 1 inch, right?
Yeah,
But there's strategies around that.
9 times out of 10 I've seen you have to go to 1 inch. So if you don't have 1 inch and you're going to add multiple dwellings, you're probably going to need to get to 1 inch. And yeah, there are strategies where you could curb items, like maybe you don't need 2 hose bibs, you could drop it down to 1, or maybe you could say you're not doing dishwashers and then add dishwashers in after. There's some loopholes or some like tactics because it's a calculation, right? So if you could formulate the calculation in your favor, then you don't have to upgrade. But at the end of the day, like I find if you're going through all of this work to renovate, a large project, it makes no sense to skip out on that item, right? Unless you're really strapped for cash, like it's one of those items where like where do you spend your money? This is one of those things to spend your money because if you do it way down the road, it's going to be way more expensive. And then size of units. So I don't know, Henry, if you got some time. I know you're driving, but what is the minimum sizes for units like that we should be considering when it comes to sizes of units?
Yeah, so there's not really a minimum unit size other than if you're dealing with zoning. So some cities like Hamilton, we have some properties, some multifamilies there that they're like maximum size like 600 square feet. But you can't really fit in 2 bedrooms in 600 square feet. So it's less of a building code and more of a city zoning requirement. But generally, we go by room sizes. So every room has a minimum size to it other than like a bathroom and a closet, right? So generally, bedrooms, we like to keep at least 100 square feet for the master bedroom,
Okay.
80 square feet for like a normal bedroom. Living, dining, kitchen, we like to keep it at the, well, this is where it gets tricky. You do 1 bedroom, your living, dining, kitchen should be like the 180. If you have 2 bedrooms, now you're looking at like jumping to 225 square feet, right? So number of bedrooms definitely affects your calculations there. But yeah, you add them all up, and we're looking at about like roughly 500 square feet for a 1 bedroom is our go-to number. But yeah, it just depends on the layout that we're working with.
Okay. No, that's really helpful. The next thing that we look at is um, additional units, like how you're going to add additional units. And we're going to get into that on number 8 of how some of these things are going to layer in. But the easiest way to separate for units is vertically, is like, you get a bungalow and you can split it vertically in half. That's the easiest way to add units, right? And as you add staircases and multiple floors, then you start to complicate the wheel. So the more layers or the more, yeah, I guess the more layers or units in between other units, the harder and more complicated it becomes. And then as you're adding more units, another big thing that you got to consider is HVAC. So typically a house is built to warm the existing structure, but when you start splitting rooms up, then airflow is per room and the heat loss by the windows. But as you start kind of like adding up extra bathrooms, extra bedrooms, well, then you need to make sure they all have a heat source. And then how you're going to achieve that heat source will really come into factor. Like mini splits are, super popular right now, energy efficient. They're not the cheapest things, and they're also not the easiest things to install, especially when you start running into multiple heads. Because if one system's got to feed like 5 heads, 6 heads, it can become difficult with some layout designs, right? Like some of them, it may be harder to do than others. As well as when you're doing new units, and I don't know if this is across the board or not, but typically they'll start making you create fresh air if there is no fresh air ventilation, correct, Henry?
Yeah, so like a lot of our projects we're doing like duplex to fourplex conversion or whatever the triplex conversion. The new units is technically we have to add in the HRV systems inside the new unit somewhere, right? And it's really city dependent. I know Hamilton's been hardcore on that, but like Niagara Falls has been too much of a pain making us do it. They're like grandfathering in because it's an existing building. So depends on the city you work with, but yeah, we're looking at another HRV per unit, and that's like what, another 3,000 per unit at that point or more.
Okay, and then so just so that everyone's aware, like heat HRV is heat recovery ventilation unit, and what it does is it basically sucks fresh air in from outside and blows dead and like stale air outward, so you're constantly having an exchange of air. And while it's doing that, it is transferring heat from the air outside to the inside air when they cross paths, and they kind of like balance each other out for like temperature, right? So if it's really hot outside and you're bringing it into cold air, it'll run across each other and kind of like equalize out for the air. And then every time you add units, you're going to run into fire code and the how you're going to structure the exits, because you either need fire escapes, you need like a landing, like a balcony or Juliet. There's ways around it, but you need to have places, two exits, right? Two primary exits for tenants or inhabitants, I guess, to leave the unit, and as well as there needs to be proper separation between units, common areas, and mechanical rooms, right? Like it's all got to fit somewhere, and depending on what area you're working through is going to determine the time, right? I don't know if you can touch on some of that, the timing of like, what's the difference between, a hallway wall into a unit versus, I don't know, ceilings and floor structures. Like they're different, right? Like the timings left to right and up and down, or does it all generally the same?
Um, they're all like, okay, so building code right now, they're saying we need 45 minutes, right, for any new build. Now, you can generally get away with 30-minute fire separation. Shoot, I missed my turn. 30-minute separation, but the problem is, this is where investors get a little bit annoyed by. Okay, you're meeting the 30-minute fire separation, but then you're not accounting for the sound insulation. So now your sound is only like 30 when you need 50. So when you add in the sound insulation, resilient channel, you're automatically jumping the 30-minute fire separation to 1 hour. So what does that mean technically? Well, you usually have to meet fire and sound insulation, and that means more money spent on the materials that you're doing that with. And then between the walls and ceilings, yeah, it's generally the same amount there. The only difference is like the service room. The service room can be 30 minutes and they don't care about the sound insulation, which means a little bit less cost around your furnace and all water systems there. What's tricky is one of our projects right now in Hamilton, they're making us fire rate a service room even though it's part of a unit. So I'm not sure you remember, but back when we were doing duplexes, it's like if the furnace room is in the basement and we fire rate around the furnace room, it becomes part of the main unit.
Yes.
And that's fine. But in my situation, the furnace room is technically part of the main floor there there's no basement unit, and they're still making us fire rate that furnace room. There's no division between that unit and another unit. So we got to spend money on fire rating a service room that's not really going to do anything. So it becomes very tricky at that point, but that's a little bit more site specific. But yeah, generally, yeah, fire and sound is what you're really looking for. Usually 1 hour is what we're doing just because of the sound insulation. And this is why I tell investors, like, if you're not demolishing the entire ceiling, you can try to get away with just doing the 30 minutes and keeping it and save yourself a bucket load of money. But then you risk the chance of an inspector going out there and forcing you to do it anyways, because let's say half of your ceiling's already gone, they might make you do the whole work anyways. So it just becomes a risk tolerance at that point.
Yeah, no, but one of the strategies I find, and I think this is a really good idea, and we just did it at our project at 45 Wellington, was like before you start your project, I bring in the investors, not the investor, the inspector. So we brought the inspector in, and we were like, this is my contractor, I'm the investor, and then this is my architect, and this is our project. And we went over the drawings. We were like going over the project, and then we're like, we want to make a couple changes, but I don't know if I need to resubmit the permit or if I can just go through it with you. And we explained to him some of the minor changes that we're doing, or that some of the stupid things that got done in the drawings, or that the city made us do and it got passed. And we were able to make changes which are going to save us money, and also like kind of confirm with the inspector what we're going to be allowed to get away with and what we're not going to be allowed to get away with. And this inspector was really good guy, really understanding. He seemed like he had a lot of experience and he's done this before. Where like some of the newer inspectors, they're gonna really stick to the book because they're gonna be newer, so they're gonna be worried about making mistakes as well as getting, in trouble for saying they could do something when somebody couldn't. Right? So I always bring in the inspector. It's like before you get pulled over, bring the cop over to your house, talk to them about like who they are, what they're like, what they're doing, and then, if that cop's pretty relaxed and he doesn't mind, going over a little bit the speed limit or whatever, then, if he's working, you might have a heavy foot. Um, but yeah, so that's like the best piece of it. Is bring the inspector in first, go over everything and the scope and the plan, how you're going to run things, and then it builds confidence in you as the person doing the work or the investor managing the work, and they're going to know that you understand what they're doing versus like, oh hey, this guy's not a person that really knows what's going on, right? And then you're just showing up for the first inspection and they see a bunch of mistakes and they're going to start to like really buckle down on you. Okay, so with the fire inspections, we typically have this system that Henry and I kind of came up with, and we called it the phased approach. And phase stands for fire code requirements, access to mechanical and electrical, zoning and permits, entrance and exits, and development costs, right? When we're looking at a property. So we touched on the fire code requirements, right? You have to create fire separation between all of your units, whether it's common area or basement area or just even the mechanical rooms, right? You're going to have to create a fire separation. So the easier you can draw a box around your unit, right? Like, you have a roof, a bottom, and then two sides to a unit. It's simple. But when you have staircases going through one unit, you have mechanical rooms above and below other units, that's when you start complicating the wheel, and now it's a little bit trickier to meet fire code requirements. Like we had ducting that has to go through one unit into another unit in order to exhaust outside. Well, once duct from unit 1 crosses over into unit 2, you got to make sure it's isolated from unit 2. So you're either fire separating all of the joist cavity that duct is going through, or you got to put fire dampeners, and you start adding cost and complexity to your projects.
Can I just interrupt for one?
Of course.
I just want to say, I'm so happy to say that this conversation, I understand thanks to you guys and Henry, like all these requirements, I know because of Henry's conversations and stuff. So thank you guys. I know about all the fire rating stuff. I learned all that with you guys. I love it.
No problem.
That's all.
Awesome, thank you. No, but it's honestly like people don't talk about this, right? Like I know you've been on courses, and I'm sure a lot of other people have done courses and programs, and they talk about stuff from a very, 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 very high level, and the person that's stuck doing all the learning on the dollar is you, right? So if we can kind of help people not fully understand it, but have a good grasp of it, kind of like you're saying, like you understand the pieces. Maybe you're not a fire separation expert, but you're going to be ready to ask these questions, or look for it in your drawings and stuff like that, so that you understand where you're not going to get screwed, right? Okay, so going into the next one is you have to have common access to the mechanical and electrical room for properties, right? And well, you should have common access to the mechanical and electrical room for properties because I don't know if you've ever gone through and you're trying to purchase a property and you hear about that tenant that won't let anybody in. You can't get in. So imagine your furnace is down and that tenant is that same tenant and they won't let you in and you can't get in. And you have three tenants, and because one tenant's being a pain in the butt, it's going to complicate, you know, the whole thing. It's going to be a mess. So if you can make sure that you have an ability for the mechanical and the electrical rooms to be accessed through a common area, it makes the ideal situation on a property. Duplexes, not really, you don't really need it because it's only 2 units, but it's definitely something you want to have like in the background because it's not a problem right now, but it'll be a problem down the road when, you know, maybe tenant in the basement doesn't like tenant upstairs and the water gets shut off and he's, not home or doesn't want to let anybody in and then tenant upstairs is crying that there's no water or maybe he has a leak and nobody can get downstairs or get a hold of the basement guy and they can't stop the leak and it really complicates matters unnecessarily. Okay, and another thing we're going to move on to is the Z on phased is zoning and permits. Like the amount of times I've come across deals or deals have been given to me and they're like, Mark, it's R1 zoning or C2 zoning. It says you can build multiplexes. You're good, man. You could do like 300 units. And then you start looking into what you're actually allowed to do is so don't be sold on like you can do this. And the first thing I say when I get these deals, like I was looking at one today, and the investor was telling me, hey, you could build a building on this. You could do at least 10, 15 units. And I was like, how do you know? And he's like, it's zoned for it. And I was like, okay, but do I have the site plan approval from the city that I can build this many units? Because if you don't, it's not true until you get paperwork. Or you have a superstar like Henry who will go through the hoops and get some of those answers for us. Because we've walked away from deals. I think there's been a couple of times where we've told Henry, hey, this is our plan. This is what we want to do. This is what we want to build. And then Henry goes to the city, looks into the zoning, and he's like, no, you can't. Or, yeah, you can, but it's in a heritage zone. Or I don't know what some of the other um, items are. It backs to the conservation area is another one. And there's like different groups have different rules. And then, yeah, it may be zoned. I don't even know what the zonings are, Henry. It may be zoned something where you can build 12 units or up to 12 units, but it doesn't actually mean you can build 12 units. So make sure you get a zoning verification report. Is that what it is, Henry?
Yeah, so like in the city of Hamilton, you can get before you even buy the property during your whole due diligence phase,
Mm-hmm.
or even before asking the agent, is like getting the zoning verification to see what exactly does the city recognize the building as. Like we had an example of like there was like a 12-plex we were looking at to buy, and then the city is like, no, it's really legalized as a 10-plex. And on that zoning, that specific area in Hamilton, the maximum number of units, legal units, is 10. So even though there's 12 units right now, legally you should only have 10. So now we're in a hard spot right now that we can't even legalize it unless we go through like minor variants or rezoning. So it's very important for you guys to understand how does the city recognize your building. I've even spoken to some realtors. They're like they go on Geo Warehouse or something.
Yeah.
I think that's what they call it. And that's not accurate at all. Like you should not be using that instead of like the city. Like that's like 99% wrong majority of the time. So always ask your city for like how do they recognize it and have it in writing, because I've had multiple times where they tell me in person over the phone and then they forget what they told me like 2 weeks later. So everything has to be by email, guys. Like do not forget that. It's so crucial to have it in case shit hits the fan, right?
Yeah, or the guys change, right? That happens often too. Like they'll just do like a shuffle in the city, and then that person that you spoke to is no longer your examiner, and then you're SOL. So get
Oh my God, yes, 100%. We've had people actually leave during the permit review, and they don't tell us. I think one of our well-in villains, like they were. I talked to the guy, and then 2 days later, they told me they fired him.
oh
I'm
wow.
like, nobody told me. Unless I called, they wouldn't have told me.
Yeah.
So yeah, always try to keep up to date with your guys.
Yeah, so having it in writing is super helpful. Um, okay, and then after zoning, I know we touched on this already, but like entrances and exits, those are like the key things I look at. If you have a multiplex and you can create dedicated entrance to each unit, you don't need a secondary exit. Is that correct?
Yeah. So the idea is, with a lot of these multifamily uh, conversions we're doing, either all units have their own dedicated exits, like a door into the units, and then, or alternatively, let's say, for example, you have a triplex, and the main and second floors share one exit way.
Yeah.
Well, then the main and second should have a secondary exit way because they both have two shared exits, right? It gets very complicated when you have a couple of them that have the shared same exit. Like it's hard to get a second exit for all the units to share, like for a triplex or a fourplex. So you would have to build like a fire escape on the backside of the building to kind of connect them all, right? Now that's more cost and time to your project. So alternatively, like the safest bet is just to do dedicated exit ways.
Yeah, so dedicated exit ways, one of the ways we've been able to loophole it around is by creating balconies on fire escapes and separating them from a fire escape, right? As their secondary
Yeah, and
exit.
this is where the city has been more tricky on now. They've been more upper like rear ends
They're
here.
catching on to
So
us.
the rule of thumb is basically, yeah, it's getting a lot worse every single week. What was it? It was like we had a what was it? We had to we had to provide a secondary exit for the attic unit, and they're fine with one shared exit and then a balcony. But the way this attic was built, you couldn't add the balcony without building a new dormer, right?
Oh,
So you can imagine the cost and the funds there needed to build a new dormer for a balcony. And the balcony had to be pretty big depending on the bedrooms you had. So Hamilton has this weird calculation there. It's like 1 square meter per occupancy.
oh,
So
really?
it gets a lot crazy in size. Yeah, it's like if you have a 2 bedroom, now it's like 4 people. So 4 square meters, right? It gets too big at that point. So it didn't make sense to do a fourplex. So we actually had to revert it, like do a triplex conversion instead of fourplex conversion.
Oh, that's pretty crazy. I didn't know Hamilton had that. And then the last
Yeah,
thing
they're getting
is
worse.
people don't really realize this. I mean, there's been some relief recently. I'll get Henry to touch on it, but is the development costs. Everybody talks about adding units, but they don't talk about the costs to adding a unit from the city side of things. So if you want to touch on like how development costs are calculated and what is the current rule of thumb for these
Yeah,
things.
so it's at least in Hamilton, and majority of cities are following the same trend. It's like up to 3 units, they're going to waive the development charges. Which, if you guys aren't familiar, back then, development charges were like not even like 2 years ago. They were like 20,000, 30,000 per unit. So if you were doing 1 to 3, which Talco and I did our triplex, fourplex like 2 years ago, give or take,
Yeah.
they were going to charge us like 20,000, 30,000 per unit. So for my triplex, they would charge me 40, 50,000 altogether. What I did back then was kind of like did 1 to 2 and then 2 to 3 to avoid development. But nowadays, you can get away with not doing any development charges. So you can go 1 to 3 without development charges, and that's fine. They'll charge you for the fourth unit if you are going that route. And in Hamilton, it's like 50,000 right there. So 1 unit, $50,000. At that point, you gotta run your numbers.
Man. Yeah, that because it adds up, right? For sure. For sure. Okay, so I'm gonna touch on the contractor side of things a little bit. And then yeah, I guess we can open it up to questions. If anybody has any questions at any point, feel free to just ask. These are some of the high level bullet points on some of the programs that we're working on right now. So getting your feedback is super helpful on this stuff. Okay, so obviously contractors, it starts to get complicated because contractors, they're difficult. They're like, not one guy knows how to do everything, and every contractor is completely different. I have some contractors doing some bidding for us on a project. One contractor is a bigger contractor, and he's waiting for quotes from his guys in order to get me the quote, so I can package the deal together for my client. And another contractor is like, hey man, so how are you pricing it, or what's the budget, or like they don't really know how to price jobs, because a lot of the contractors I've seen didn't really go to school to become contractors. A lot of people that end up doing contracting work kind of just end up there, and anybody that really went to school would typically end up working for like large contractors or unions. So all this like middle or small ground size projects that we typically do, as investors, or that you guys will typically encounter, you're going to get, you know, a variety of contractors. There's going to be the guys that want to get paid like, they're building you the Taj Mahal. And then you're going to have guys that are willing to drop their price, but they're not going to capture the full scope, and they're going to miss stuff. And then because they miss stuff, you're going to start to go over budget, and you're going to start to add on items that you didn't originally plan on. And it's not necessarily all to blame on the contractor because he missed it. So, I mean, if he didn't charge you for it, he shouldn't eat the cost. If it's going to cost him more money, it should cost you more money. It's just difficult when you as an investor are budgeting, your projects based on what the guy is telling you, right? Like, hey, I need you to do my basement. And they're like, yeah, no problem. I'll do your whole basement. And then, when you got to start doing fire separation, they were like, oh, we didn't price fire separation. I didn't know we were going to do, I didn't know I had to do Roxol, double drywall, resilient channel. Like I didn't know that all of these things were gonna get there. I thought it was just, half-inch drywall. So they mispriced it. You went with them and it went to a lower price. So because of the scope was off, your cost is gonna go up, right? So big thing is obviously having an experienced guy give you the scope of work. Yeah, insert change orders. That's right, Trammy. Change orders are a massive one, that come up with contractors. So what I typically like to do is try to build out a scope of work that has too much stuff in it, so that we can remove stuff afterwards, or go over the scope with the client. But I mean, I've got a lot of experience, so it's helping you guys create scope of works. So one of the things that I do is I start to tell investors to start getting quotes early on, right? Like take good videos, have them do walkthroughs before you close on the property. And contractors are all going to give you different quotes and different things, and they're going to ask you a bunch of different questions. And every time they add a question, you want to add it to your list. So for example, if you're telling them you want to renovate your kitchen, and they start asking you like, are you upgrading the electrical? And you didn't know that already, well, then you could add that to your list. And if you get a few quotes from bigger guys, you should have a decent comprehensive list, right? Outside of knowing, like, there's too much to know for anybody to kind of have all of the skill set required to understand scope of work. I'm going to build out a scope of work program, which is going to help kind of, I think we're going to collaborate with Henry a bit on it, is what things are going to trigger other pieces, like even, removing a wall, right, is a simple scope of work. Everybody wants to do open concept, so you remove a wall. Okay, but what does removing a wall mean? If there's mechanical in that wall, okay, well now you're going to have to involve an HVAC guy or even potentially a mechanical engineer if the complexity of what you're moving is there's a lot of like air moved out of there, so you might have to do that change. Um, if there's electrical running up and down in that wall, and now it's going to affect all of the circuitry upstairs, well, now you're going to have to reroute all of your wires on the exterior of the walls, and you're going to be opening up drywall, and you're going to start to add way more components to it. But if you understand how the wall is built, um, you could kind of get a good sense of like, am I gonna need to change stuff? Like plumbing is a big one. If there's plumbing located closely to that wall above or below, well, there might be plumbing running through it. And if you start messing around with plumbing, well, drains only drain downward, right? So if you remove the ability, the only way for that toilet upstairs to drain, well, then you got to come up with a plan B and where you're going to put it. And if like there's a certain drop for every foot that you got to do for drains, and if you go way too far, then that drain like then you're gonna have to build a bulkhead, and it complicates things. So we're gonna work on different scopes for kind of different pieces, which will hopefully help you guys as investors narrow down what is a true scope of work. Like for example, kitchens is another one. If you don't have GFI plugs in your existing kitchen, that probably means you don't have dedicated electrical lines. And in today's code, you do need dedicated lines. And in previous code, you don't. So if you rearrange the layout of the kitchen, you're going to have to do upgrades. And a dedicated line means running a line from the panel all the way to that plug. So every plug on the kitchen should have a dedicated line. So a dishwasher needs to have its own line, a microwave needs to have its own line, obviously the stove, the fridge, and any wall plugs that are throughout your backsplash. So all of those will all need their own line. So you could add 5 circuits to your panel. Does your panel have room for 5 circuits? What is the complexity of bringing power from your kitchen to your fuse panel if you change the layout? If you don't change the layout and you take everything out and you just put the cabinetry back to where it was, well, then you don't need dedicated circuits, right? So that's a huge cost change, but knowing that would obviously be very helpful. So we're going to work on some of that stuff. Using other contractors, they're going to be able to kind of ask you questions and give you feedback, and I think that'll be helpful. And that's part of getting bids. So what I do is I try to get the contractors to give me bids. A big thing that I do when I get contractors to do bids is say you're going to buy the material, because contractors are complicated enough as it is. And if you add the variable of material, it makes it even harder to figure out what price you're actually getting for the renovation. So I'm not saying like you can't buy flooring from the contractor or they can't supply their own trim, but if you're like, I want you to just give me a labor price, and then later on we can negotiate. Maybe he can buy flooring cheaper than you can, and it's going to save you $2 and make him $1. Well, then it becomes worth it to buy it from him. But till that point, till you're ready to work with that contractor, I keep that separate so that you could get quotes just on labor. And then the only variable will be scope of work, if that makes sense. Okay. Getting a contractor. Yep.
Do you mind if I ask you, just going back, so you were just saying that to get the contractor to give you the quote for the labor only?
Yes.
Is that what you said?
Yes.
Okay.
When you're gonna spearhead the renovation, right? It's good, like unless you have a trusted contractor, but like if you're just randomly looking for random people, right? Because look at from in my situation, for example, we have a sister company that manufactures kitchens. We purchase flooring at high quantities, trim at high quantities. So my pricing with the material together or separate, like it's probably going to be way more competitive than most contractors. The contractor that's buying trim at Home Depot and marking it up and giving you a price is probably going to be way higher, right? Because they're buying retail, right? I don't buy retail. I'm buying containers. They're buying, individual packets. And where they get their kitchen from, maybe they're buying it from a kitchen guy who doesn't actually have machines to build the kitchens, and they're just ordering parts from another company. So you don't know how many layers of commission are being put on your product, right? So if you use retail or, any trusted supplier that you have, then at least that allows you to balance out the labor side of the quote. Because I'm sure you've gotten quotes from contractors before, Trami, and not one of them is going to look the same, right? My quote won't look the same as anybody else's, typically. So if you separate the
Yeah, so this is
material,
like so this is more like managing the individual components of the rentals,
correct.
right? You're
Yes.
self-manage the renovation
Yes. Yes. Yes.
or
But
manage
even
the
getting bids,
renovation
right? Like
overall.
how you would get a bid for a project, right? If you're supplying a lot, like I tell clients to supply the finishing, or like give them a price for the finishing, or just say you're going to supply the finishing. If you're getting 50 quotes, if everybody is buying, like for flooring, for example, I may be buying flooring at 99 cents. My competitor might be buying at $1.50. The other guy might be buying at $3. So that in itself is going to change what the price of your floor is, right? So that's going to create a variable for how to get pricing, right? Because it's going to be all over the place. And then who the contractor is doing the installation, right? Like my labor is a little more expensive because I have higher overhead. I have, marketing, and we have like catalogs, and we use Builder Trend, and like we use different systems than like my dad, who operates out of his van, and him and I used to go around to doing jobs. We would give you like a quote on a piece of paper, or like maybe we would send you an email with a number on it, right? So it's completely different. So you like that price is going to, the labor is going to be completely different, and the material is going to be completely different. But if you take away the material, then they can only quote you on the labor, and you can decide who you're willing to risk your reno with, right? Whether it's, a guy that operates out of the car, but you know what, they got tons of great referrals, and you have some experience with them maybe, or maybe you don't. They come with good referrals. You've been able to vet them and see some of their good work. Then maybe you go with the cheaper guy. Or if the reno's really complex and complicated, and you know, Taco and his dad are the only two people on the team, but you're trying to do a fiveplex or a sixplex, well, they're not going to be enough to be able to do it in a timely manner, right? Where if you have like hire a bigger company that has multiple crews and lots of guys, well, they're going to be more expensive, but they're actually going to be capable to do the work, right? So those are some things that you should be looking for, and really taking into account is the size of the crew as well. Also, purchasing the material and managing the material, it's good to go over the required material with the contractor prior to purchasing it. And one thing that I like to do to my contractors, not as an investor, as just a contractor managing some subcontractors that we use, is if their flooring is going to take them, let's say, 2 days to do the flooring, and you have purchased 2,500 square feet of flooring, you're not too sure. That's just the number the contractor gave you. You're trusting the contractor, so you're just going to go with it, and you order the floor. What I do is I show up on day, like late afternoon, day one, and at the beginning of, or midday, day two. And what I'm doing is I'm looking at how much floor is in and how many boxes are left. If I bought 50 boxes and they're 75% done the project, and there is 30 boxes left, well, then I feel like just on that simple math, there's going to be extra. So then I want to make sure I'm there to catch the extra before the contractor catches the extra and puts it in their car and either takes it to Home Depot and gets a gift card because you don't need a receipt to get money from Home Depot, right? That's where Home Depot is a scary place. Great because you can return anything, but bad because anybody can return anything, right? So if you bought flooring from Home Depot, I could show up to your job site, take your floor, and go to Home Depot, and I would get money from them, right? So I try to beat the contractor to the punch by monitoring their material usage by being there inspecting their unit, right? Same with trim. I look around and I can count. Usually I use the seams of the trim. You can see where the seams or the joints are. So you know if you bought 20 pieces of trim and they're like, yeah, we're all out of trim, but you look around and you only see 10 pieces of trim, well, where did the other 10 go? It's math. It's just real math, right? You can't,
We're
there's,
still blowing the industry.
we
Now
can't,
we're all gonna be paranoid.
I'm not saying there's a lot of honest people. I'm not saying there's a lot of bad people, but what I am trying to do is protect you guys from getting taken, right? $5 worth of trim times however many pieces, times however many projects, times, right? Like that dollar
Yep.
starts to add up. And I know guys have stolen from me all the time. Trust me. Why do you think it's on my list? Because it's something that I've experienced with guys that do tons and tons of work for me, right? I've had painters.
How do you feel about having like cameras just like inside just to watch? Is that like something that is like acceptable in the cultural
I think,
contractor industry?
I would say most contractors are gonna say no,
Okay.
right? Because you're gonna get into privacy issues and like, how do I know, what you're gonna use that video for? Maybe my guy doesn't use the guards on the saws because they're a pain in the butt and they can't work efficiently, and then it might put me at risk for you know a health and safety fine, or right, like it's like there's some stuff that contractors do that they shouldn't do, and everybody knows that they do it, but nobody really says anything until you get caught, right? Like you're not supposed to use stilts to mud and tape projects. But I've been to job sites where guys were using stilts, right? So, you know, I I can tell them that, hey, you're not allowed to use stilts. Make sure you get off your stilts. But when I walk away, I know they're going to be back on those stilts. I can only do so much. Like there's only so much onus on me as the managing contractor, right? Like safety glasses. Technically everybody needs to be wearing safety glasses. Technically everybody needs to be wearing hard hats. Everybody needs to be wearing safety shoes. There's lots of like rules and regulations, but is everybody going to follow it? Am I going to fire everybody that doesn't follow it? I'll run out of people. I already don't have enough people, right? So there's
Yeah, that's like micromanaging too, and people are gonna feel like a
it's
certain
too
way
much,
about.
right? So it's kind of like that's where, but the camera opens up Pandora's box in that light, right? Even though you're doing it for a different reason, but it just, it opens them up for potential for other problems to arise from it. So typically the guys are not for it, and maybe some guys don't care, but like the bigger the project, for example, like your project, we're gonna have mechanical guys, we're gonna have electricians, we're gonna have plumbers, you're gonna have drywall tapers, right? Like finishing guys, all of those guys may not agree, right? And then it's gonna be complicated. Like I'm gonna go just specifically hire guys that are okay with being videotaped, right? Like it just complicates the whole process.
Yeah, fair enough. Absolutely, I
That's
get
my
it.
take on that. I mean, I love content. I love filming. Like I'm all pro cameras, but my guys aren't, right? Like even when I show up to go film content on job sites, they're like, no, 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 don't, like, let us get out of here first, right? They don't want it. everybody's different, and you just got to respect people's boundaries at the end of the day. But it's complicated because you're always dealing with lots of different trades or different companies, so it's not as easy to get a camera in there.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's the challenge, right? Like trying to get some sort of uh accountability for what is happening.
exactly.
Um, but then it's like you don't want to, make people feel uncomfortable working in your place and not have that like freedom to just
You got it.
independently do what they need to do. So
It's complicated, right? It's complicated. Um, yeah. Okay. So back to the next couple pieces. Uh, Contractor paperwork. There's a bunch of paperwork that you should have, and they should have on site as well. Obviously, they need to have a WSIB clearance certificate if they're going to be doing large projects. Mainly for WSIB, you need it for contractor to contractor. So like subs who work for me need to have WSIB. But if I work directly for the homeowner, then the clearance certificate isn't really required. Like to a homeowner, it's not required, but business to business, it's required. Insurance, obviously, you should get some sort of liability insurance for your project, especially the larger the project. You should make sure that that contractor has coverage, because the last thing you want to do is have a contractor that has no coverage and then something happens and you have no, you can't take blood from a stone, right? The other thing that's kind of like the onus is on you to provide especially as a building owner, is a designated substance report, which you should be getting on all of your properties technically, especially if you're doing work on them. What it is it's testing that happens on your property, and what they do is they test the drywall, they test the paint, they test the caulking, they look at the age and all of the aspects of the building, and they will do some lab tests. It's like $1,000 for the report typically, and it'll tell you what is in your building. So the reason it's there and it's required is to protect, one, your contractors, and two, people like your tenants and even your handyman who may not be contractors. Maybe they don't really know what asbestos looks like. And if they're drilling into a wall and spewing asbestos everywhere, well, one, they're affecting themselves, their health, and they're also potentially affecting other tenants, right? Like the last thing I would want to know is that I let a contractor drill through a wall that had asbestos in it, and it was, a rental property that had small children. Sure, I cleaned up the dirt, vacuumed it, but what about like the particles that are floating in the air, right? Like it's not healthy. So there's rules to like how you tackle each piece, and in the designated substance report, it'll tell you what type of substance it is, how to treat the substance, and how to properly remove it. So it gives you all that kind of data. And then obviously you need health and safety paperwork on your job site. Like you should have even just providing to your contractor where the nearest hospital is, right? What's the address? What's the location? What are the emergency numbers? Like who do they contact if I chop my leg off on your job site, who do I call, right? Besides 911, right? You got to have all that kind of stuff sorted out, as well as an agreement that they're going to adhere to all of the health and safety requirements, like proper PPE, right? Protective equipment, so that, nobody's bitching at you that the guys on site aren't wearing safety shoes, right? You're like, well, before they started, I got them all to sign paperwork to say that they were going to adhere to the health and safety regulations. Here's my safety board. I gave them, the address to the hospital and the hospital numbers in case of emergencies. Like I did everything from my due diligence, so the onus is on the contractor. Um, and then last, not well, I guess not last, but the other thing is managing the work, right? So I have some checklists. Let me see if I can stop streaming. and share. Wait, let me find it. Okay, this is a sample checklist that I have. I'm building it out more robust, but this is a sample. Mm, there we go. Let me make it a little bigger. So I'm going to create a giant checklist for each section of the phases of work on the project. And I'm gonna have lots on there, and then based on the scopes that we were talking about earlier, it will tell you which ones should be on there and which ones shouldn't be on there. So ideally, I'm going to turn this into an Eidolon tool so that if you're doing a kitchen, it's going to add the checklist for the kitchen. If you're going to do load bearing wall removal, it'll add more items or take items away based on what projects you're doing. And then you're going to be able to add or remove anything you want at the end of it. So sample demo inspection list, where all the walls removed properly as per the spec, no screws or nails on the old studs. Like they'll just remove the drywall, but all the screws and stuff like that are still on there, right? So that's still not done. For me, it's got to be like just bare wood, right? If they're just removing the trim, make sure the trim gets cut away so the paint doesn't like rip up. They should be cutting the paint line above the baseboard and then pulling off the baseboard, because that's gonna just remove the baseboard and leave the paint on the wall, and you're not ripping up paint off of the wall and creating more patchwork for yourself and your team. Fire separation checklist, there's going to be stuff on there, right? Like, are the ceiling and walls drops secured? um Framing. Is everything secured properly? Are the walls plumb and level? Okay, like especially in the tub, this is why I put it in there, is the tub areas correct and even? Like having uneven walls is going to affect your tile, right? Tiles are perfectly square. So if you have a V-shaped wall, as you start tiling your wall, then you're going to need to add a little piece of more tile, or you're going to have to spread out the grout line. So you're going to have to do something to correct that. So if you're checking it before they drywall, then you can get the guys to fix it. These are
Oh,
some of
you
the
forgot an important one.
what?
Turn off water and gas lines. For a demo.
Oh, yes. Well, this is the sample. Like this is our sample. I just wanted to show you some of them. I have like a really robust list being built out for each category. We have stuff like protecting the hallways in the apartment buildings. There's a bunch of stuff. I've dealt with everything. I've had like people throw garbage out balconies or out windows. You can't do that, but some people feel like it's faster than going down the stairs. I've had no shortage of fun things I needed to add to my checklist because somebody dumb did something stupid. Yeah, so water valves, right? Are the drain heights correct? Okay, there are minimums for drain heights for the kitchens and the bath, especially with the sink. Like I've had it where we were doing sinks and they were like extra deep sinks, and they were the kitchen drains were set at a certain height, and the cabinets were in, everything went in, and then we went to go put in the quartz, the sink couldn't go in, and then we ended up having to cut open the cabinet, cut open the drywall, adjust the plumbing, and then fix it all back because we didn't check it at this point, right? So these are things to help avoid stuff down the line, so that it obviously you're minimizing how much you're redoing work, because that's the worst thing that you could possibly do is redo work, because every time you redo work, it costs you, even if it doesn't cost you money, it's always going to cost you time, right? Like even if it wasn't your fault, maybe the contractor fucked up, and sure, you could blame him and he will cover the cost and do it, but it's still going to cost you time. Okay, so we're going to talk like fire separation checklists, like through penetrations are caulked. When you're doing 2x4 studs, you should have a 5/8 fire break, like a piece of drywall above the studs, single or double, depending on what it says on your drawing, so that you could have continuous fire separation. If you've ever been dinged before, it's a pain in the butt. If not, you got to start fire separating the joist cavities, and it's a pain in the butt to do it afterwards. Um, taking photos is also really good for fire separations, especially stuff that shows that the drywall is 5/8 drywall, because sometimes inspectors will ask for photos, and if you don't got them, he's going to be like, can you cut open a channel in the wall just so I could see to make sure that everything was done correctly? And it's a pain in the butt. Again, it may not cost you time. It may not cost you money, but it'll definitely cost you time no matter what. So doing some of this stuff will be helpful. Trimming doors, right? Like, are the joints proper? Are the nails filled properly? Are the door latches all correct? No doors are rubbing. Um, painting, painting is pretty straightforward. Um, is it the right color? That's another one that isn't on there. Um, there's lots. I mean, you can go on, like, touch up lists could be endless, but the more of these you have, and what I do is I give them to the contractor, right? I give them to the contractor so that they can, let me stop the sharing. Oh no, I'm frozen. Can you guys hear me? Am I frozen? I'm frozen. Oh no. Ah!